is the secret whispered in the dark, the deathbed confession that topples an empire, the lost spell fragment that can shackle the mortal races forever. He waits in hidden places, unearthing dark knowledge and horrible, long-buried things to further his dark goals. In a time now forgotten, he once ruled as a lich, and all of Earth feared his name. He was Vecna, the Undying King, Vecna the Whispered One, Vecna the Lord of the Rotted Tower. But his 1,000 years of terror was brought to a halt by betrayal. In a moment of crisis, his vampire lieutenant, Cast the Bloody-Handed, challenged Vecna's rule, and their calamitous battle spelled the end of them both. Or did it? Long thought destroyed, but still feared more than any living being, the artifacts of his hand and eye, the last physical remnants of the Archlich to survive, continued his legacy. Centuries passed, and the artifacts traveled from land to land, sowing evil wherever they went. Although his mortal realm was broken, Vecna's name still carried a dread weight, and a cult of fear grew about him. Even one as depraved as Vecna attracted those who revered and adored him. Some sought his artifacts for their power. Others thought they were the keys to finding Vecna himself. And a few even wished only to worship his greatness in the hopes he would teach them. All these things fed the Whispered One, for his will, evil and perverted, was too powerful to be destroyed even when his body had perished. For untold centuries he drifted, refusing to surrender, as small traces of power flowed to him, the energy of his worshippers on Earth. Carefully he weaved his plan to bring himself back to the mortal world, for that is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. I am Omar Timsaw.
I am William Stark.
And this is D&D Legends and Lore. Hey everyone, Omar here. Before we get into today's episode, two things. First, we wanted to thank our amazing patrons and members. Your generous support is incredibly important and appreciated, and directly aids in the creation of more Legends and Lore content. If you aren't a member or patron and would like to support us directly, you can check us out on Patreon and YouTube memberships, links below. There you'll also get access to early episodes, the ability to vote on what topics we cover next, third-party D&D content, and more. So if that all sounds interesting, check it out. Second, we've partnered with the insanely talented folks over at Homie and the Dude on the Kickstarter for their project, Scorched Basin. You may have already heard about it from the many other creators in the space who are collaborating on the project, like XP to Level 3, D&D Shorts, Bob Worldbuilder, and a ton more. But for those of you that haven't, it's a Mad Max and Dune-inspired desert TTRPG setting book, and it's loaded with a ton of creative and inspiring content to include at your table. It has a new alchemy system that allows you to combine local flora to create fun concoctions, movement and combat rules for their new land vehicles, and a totally unique magic system called the Current, which includes 30 different manipulations players can learn that have multiple levels of advancement to enhance their effects, and a ton more. Most importantly, the setting is system agnostic, so whether you're likely playing D&D 5e, or another system like Daggerheart, Pathfinder, Savage Worlds, Call of Cthulhu, or any of your favorite TTRPG systems, you'll have no problem dropping Scorched Basin into your existing world, or playing an entire campaign there. It's a really cool project that we're very happy to be collaborating with. As of the release of this episode, the Kickstarter is still open, though not for too much longer. Scorched Basin closes on October 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so you've got until then to check it out. We have an affiliate link in the description that'll take you straight to the Scorched Basin Kickstarter. We earn a portion of all pledges made through said link, so it can be a great way to grab an awesome setting book and support us here at D&D Legends and Lore. As always, all links are located in the description. The Circle of Eight had gathered. Long had the city of Greyhawk been ruled in the shadows by these keepers of the balance. Powerful wizards led by Mordenkainen himself and dedicated to keeping the city safe and prosperous. It was for that purpose they had again come together in the far-flung corner of the Kron Hills, for a shadow now loomed over the city of Greyhawk. An impending and inscrutable doom none could understand. Divination magic of any sort related to the future of the city and its inhabitants was being obfuscated. Even the most powerful spells brought to bear against this disruptive magical aura could not penetrate the veil drawn over the fate of the city. So it was the Circle of Eight arrived here, at the source of the disruption, an ancient burial mound from a bygone era. From the outside, the mound appeared unexceptional. Standing in the center of a wooded hollow, the mound rose above the sucking wet mud. Along the southern edge of this cairn, the earth sagged and collapsed inward, revealing a root-choked passage lined with heavy blocks of stone. The Circle of Eight lingered outside for a moment as they considered what evil may lie within, but one by one, they descended into the dark. The inside of the mound contained a few simple passages and chambers built from megalithic stones, cunningly fit together. The ceiling slabs once had thick wooden beams that had long since rotted away. Many of the ceiling stones loomed above, cracked by their own weight. Downward the wizards walked, across shattered stone and past silent graves, until they came to the heart of the cairn, a hallway ending in another thick slab of stone, this one heavily carved with magical inscriptions. The magical seal still held strong, but the evil energies emanating from the room were undeniable. The Circle of Eight undid the magical spell which sealed the door. They passed into an ancient crypt, a large stone platform filling one end of the chamber. Atop it stood an elaborately carved sarcophagus. The wood had begun to rot away, and a husk-like corpse, visible through the holes in the side, lay within. It had only one eye, and its left hand was missing, and before the circle could react, it let out a horrifying scream as it hurled open its sarcophagus. As incantations began to be cast by the wizards who trespassed upon this unhallowed ground, dark forms began to coalesce around them. Black wings and shadowy claws came at them in a flurry. All the Circle of Eight could do was stave off the attacks of their assailants as they tried to regroup. In the chaos, they lost sight of the undead entity they had awoken. By the time the first of them detected their own movement slowing, it was already too late. Time Stop, a spell of the 9th level, the highest level of magic any spellcaster could hope to achieve. The wizards stared in frozen horror as their inevitable doom became apparent to them. One by one, the undead archmage snapped their necks, and to each he said the following: "You fools, I am Vecna. Vecna. And I am finally free." In the final moments of the clash between Cass the Bloody-Handed and Vecna the Undying, Vecna managed to banish his betrayer to the Plane of Ash, a transitional realm formed where the elemental forces of fire and the decaying forces of negative energy meet. There, in that endless landscape of death and entropy, Cass would spend the last moments of his life. But Vecna was not able to prevent Cass's final blow with the enchanted black blade Vecna had himself forged. Vecna's body was annihilated, and his will banished across the cosmos. After his death, Vecna's cult remained incredibly secretive for many generations, often with no more than a handful of individuals meeting over the course of a year. But as time passed, his followers grew bolder, although still cautious, as their would-be god's agenda puts them at odds with every other faith. In small communities and remote areas, the cult acted more openly, using fear and blackmail to keep the common folk in line. While in larger settlements they remained quiet, communicating in codes and symbols drawn on doors or muttered in dark alleys. While some sought the cult willingly, many who joined the faith did so because another cultist with knowledge of some damning secret about them drew them into the cult through blackmail and coercion. The cult of Vecna was and is to this day a web of connected secrets, with constant threats to reveal or exploit knowledge about each other. This has resulted in an odd, quiet tension, as cultists agree to work together peaceably to advance the goals of the cult without fear of assassination or treachery, thanks to contingent plans to reveal secrets in the event of an unexpected demise. Furthermore, while a living person can keep a secret, a dead one is vulnerable to the Speak with Dead spell, so it is in a cultist's best interest to protect the person who knows their secret. Finally, as their god was once a lich, some cultists join the faith in the hopes of becoming undead after they die. The result of these connections and beliefs is that Vecna's cultists are not inclined to sell out each other, but neither are they recklessly suicidal. Vecna's cults work together in the face of danger, and, unlike many chaos cults or death cults, manage to actually raise their lord to a level of divinity. The process took a long time, gathering his power, responding to his worshippers, and settling himself among the great powers. Vecna persevered and eventually reached the point where he was accepted as a minor demigod in the legions of evil. This power came at a price, however, and he was imprisoned for a time in an extraplanar realm. Guaranteed immortality, Vecna was still not satisfied. With his scheming mind, he devised a plan to ascend to greater godhood and humble his rival deities. With his usual long patience, Vecna worked on this plan for centuries. In those plans, he set his sights on the greatest city of his old homeworld of Unearth, the city of Greyhawk, and the time had finally come. Vecna's power was once unparalleled on the mortal plane. His empire stretched across continents, and his arcane power and knowledge were unchallenged by all, save perhaps his greatest apprentice, the Archlich Acererak. But even at the height of his power, Vecna laid down contingencies should any of his plans go awry, and death somehow claim him. So it was that Vecna placed 7 objects of power at strategic locations across the world of Unearth. These objects, also known as the 7 Keys, a combination of powerful magic items, relics, and even specific geographical locations, were infused with massive arcane power and connected to each other to form a powerful circuit of magical energy that could be harnessed to cataclysmic effect should Vecna ever need to draw on them. Yet Vecna was foiled, for when the Whispered One was nearly annihilated and flung across the cosmos after his stalemate with Cass the Bloody-Handed, he was completely cut off from this contingency. That is, until over the centuries, the cult that rose up around his name began to supply power to him via prayer and worship. Vecna connected with this cult and set them to work, and his plan once again had the potential to be set in motion. With the activation of the 7 Keys, Vecna would weave a web of pure arcane energy around the entire world. This web, powered by the arcane circuit of the 7 Keys and Vecna's newfound divinity, would create a magical effect that isolated the entire world of Unearth from all other deities. By severing the connection of all other gods to the world, Vecna would be the only divine entity with access to the souls and faith of the populace. This, inevitably, would grant him an unparalleled surge of power, allowing him to ascend from a demigod to a greater deity. And with the Circle of 8 disposed of, Vecna needed only achieve 3 things in order to become unchallenged across the cosmos. To reunite his body with his severed hand and eye, powerful artifacts in their own right. Elude the notice of the other gods who would undoubtedly move to stop him in force should they realize his plot. And, as his wisdom gathered from his millennia of unlife, he would have to take steps to thwart any meddlesome adventurers from taking notice of his activities. History was full of would-be do-gooders thwarting the great and mighty through their misguided sense of honor, glory, and no small amount of luck. Vecna would fall prey to no such fate. Tovag Baragu, also known as the Stone Circles. It was here, at this enigmatic and ancient site in the dry steppes beneath the shadow of the Crystal Mist Mountains, that Vecna would make his return. This massive structure, more than a mile across, was made up of 5 concentric rings of towering, smooth alabaster white stone pillars. The pillars were said to be impervious to time, showing no signs of erosion or weathering, though they had stood for millennia. It was here the cult of Vecna had gathered. Their ritual was near completion. Long ago, Vecna had imbued this location with a portion of his power, transforming it into one of his 7 keys. But this place had a power all its own. The origins of these ancient stones was a mystery even in Vecna's time. Some said they were the creations of an ancient human empire, whose sages were wise and knowledgeable beyond those of the modern day. Others said the stones predated history and mankind itself. But regardless of their origin, the most significant aspect of Tovag Baragu was their magical ability to function as a series of portals. The arches and spaces between the pillars were said to contain gateways to other planes, dimensions, and even different times. Under normal circumstances, the exact destination of these portals can vary depending on astronomical phenomena, such as the conjunction of stars and planets. But not today. Today, it was Vecna who was pulling the strings, and he had orchestrated the events leading to this day. The chanting of the cult reverberated between the stone pillars, creating a disturbing discordance in their cadence. Dark magic could be felt permeating the very air. With a crack of lightning, the portal began to open. Beyond lay the infinite realm of the astral. The time was nigh. The portal now open. Vecna's semi-divine spirit pierced the veil of the mortal realm. The prepared vessel received him. Now, reunited with his hand and eye, the Archlich-made demigod was again complete. And with a lurching surge that seemed to warp the very sky, the 7 keys, including Tovag Baragu itself, connected with Vecna and began to cut off Earth from the rest of reality. Vecna immediately felt his power expand. As the gods of the outer planes began to become disconnected from their worshippers, his divinity soared to greater heights. There was none who could stop him now, for in this state, only a god could stand against him, and they were all but cut off from the world. But in the millennia of Vecna's absence from Earth, gods had risen and fallen. Thus it was that either the Whispered One was unaware, or maybe underestimated the presence of a divinity upon the mortal plane itself. Ayuz, the demigod of deceit, evil, oppression, pain, and wickedness, known as the Old One and Old Wicked, among other titles. Born of a tryst between the legendary witch queen Igwilv and her lover, the demon prince Grazit, Ayuz was an inheritor of great power, who rose to the status of demigod through conquest and guile. His symbols are a grinning human skull, or a human skull with blood-red highlights. Unlike most deities of Earth, Ayuz made his home on Earth instead of the outer planes, a benefit of being a demi-deity instead of pure divinity. Here in the mortal plane, he ruled a broad swath of the Flanaess known as the Empire of Ayuz. The worshippers of Ayuz ever seek to further the expansion of their master's empire. Clerics of Ayuz are commonly known as liars among the faithful, and their ability to use their deceit to infiltrate the lands and organizations around their empire are exceptional. Perhaps it was thus that the cult of Ayuz caught wind of Vecna's plot. Or perhaps it was the work of adventurers that had brought on the demigod's attention. Regardless of the cause, here, amidst the standing stones of Tovag Baragu, looming above the chanting cultists of Vecna, appeared the evil demigod known as Ayuz the Evil. And he would not suffer Vecna to succeed, for this would be his ritual to seize control of. and it would be Ayus who would rise to greater godhood and become the sole deity of all Oerth. Vecna screamed in unadulterated rage at the sight of this opposing demigod they called Old Wicked, and the two met in a mighty clash. The two unleashed the full might of their divinity upon one another. As such, it was a battle of indomitable wills as much as divine magics, arcane incantations, and force of supernatural strength. The earth shook below the deities. The sky blackened with dark clouds lit only by the light of spells and divine energy hurled between Vecna and his foe. The wind howled. The great stones of Tovag Baragu cracked, and the ritual fell into disarray as cultists began fleeing for their lives. And still the two demigods fought on, evenly matched. Only one would survive this contest, even if just barely, and whomever did stand victorious would claim the mortal plane as their trophy. Oerth was doomed either way. The great portal, still open to the astral plane, began to crackle with energy as it became increasingly unstable. Vecna drew power from the site itself, preparing for the final blow against Ayus. Ayus in turn gathered his power and readied himself to strike directly at Vecna and finish this bout. And whether it was the interaction of divine and arcane energies caught in the volatility of the portal, or the momentum of Ayus' lunge at the undead deity, or maybe some other force at work that caused it, in a blinding flash, Tovag Baragu was shattered. The portal closed forever, and both deities were gone, hurled into the astral plane, and Oerth was quiet once again. In the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons, there are powers above and beyond even that of gods. The Lady of Pain, who rules the center of reality and is impervious to even the greatest of deities' power and influence. From the far realm hail the incomprehensible, reality-shattering entities known as the Great Old Ones, whose very presence seems to undo reality and whose forms are inscrutable and immortal. And then there are the dark powers. Beyond the purview of gods and the comprehension of mortals, the dark powers are an unknowable mystical force with a will and motive all their own. They are not gods in the traditional sense, as they do not seek worship and have no clear moral alignment, though their actions are almost always cruel. They rule from the shadows of an innumerable number of demiplanes they created or carved out from the other planes of existence, known as the domains of dread. The dark powers are also responsible for the mists of Ravenloft, which serve as the boundaries of their domains of dread. The mists can appear anywhere in the multiverse, and do so to draw in powerful entities who have committed heinous acts of great evil. Once a suitable Dark Lord is found, the mists trap them in a slice of their home world, creating a new domain of dread. Why they do this, none know, but though these Dark Lords are often stationed as the de facto rulers of their new domain, they are almost always created to be a personalized hell for the Dark Lord who cannot escape. It was thus that Vecna found himself in his own dark domain, captured by the mists of Ravenloft and imprisoned in the domain of Cavidius. But he was not alone, for the dark powers deemed it appropriate that his prison cell shared a border with another. Cass the Bloody-Handed had too found himself made a Dark Lord. His domain, Tovag, shared a border with Cavidius. Together, the domains for a cluster called the Burning Peaks, and the vampiric warlord was consumed with the thought of vengeance against his former master. The Burning Peaks. This region of volcanic ash and perpetual twilight leeches the life from its inhabitants as it crushes their spirits. On either side of the great mountain range lie the domains of Tovag and Cavidius. The masters of these two realms hated each other in life, and have carried over this enmity into their undeath. Centuries have passed since they both arrived in this realm, and each struggles to gain power over the other, determined to slay an enemy who always remains hidden on the opposite side of the Burning Peaks. Night does not exist in Cavidius, or perhaps day does not. It can be difficult to tell, for the uniformly dark gray sky creates a perpetual state of twilight throughout this domain. The vast majority of this realm consists of nothing more than a seemingly endless desert of ash spewed from the volcanoes of the burning peaks. These emissions give the sky its somber, oppressive color. Known as the Ashen Wastes, the deserts of Covidius can be lethal. Any living creature who travels through these wastes immediately begins to die. No healing of any kind is possible within the Ashen Wastes, even through magical means. Only within the walls of the citadel Covidius can the wounded hope to be restored to health. At the eastern edge of this domain, where the jagged slopes of the burning peaks rise like shark's teeth from the Ashen Waste, life is just as unwelcome. In addition to the deadly properties of the Ashen Wastes, these volcanic mountains suffer from flowing lava, streams of highly acidic water, frequent tremors, avalanches, and other natural perils, which makes the battles held there even more dangerous. The only city in Vecna's realm is the skull-shaped citadel Covidius. A looming edifice of undeath, the eyes of the skull stare out across a lifeless wasteland. The city serves as a home for 10,000 people and approximately 5,000 undead beings, all under the direct rule of the demigod himself. Dim, skull-shaped lamps light the streets of this city. Although these lights seem to burn eternally, they do not offer nearly enough illumination to suit the tastes of the living. The lamps leave many areas of shadow and darkness for the undead spirits to hide, watch, and occasionally lash out upon the unwary. Even the ceiling high above serves as a roost for darting shadows and creeping specters. The flagstone road out of Citadel Covidius eventually branches into 3 separate roads, which reach across the Ashen Wastes, wind their way through passes in the burning slopes, and emerge in the domain of Cass the Bloody-Handed, a realm mockingly named Tovag, the site where Vecna previously was thwarted and then pulled into the domains of Dread. As it leaves the Citadel, it is well constructed and maintained, but over the course of its transit, it gradually becomes more worn and broken. By the time they reach the passes, the white stones turn brown, stained with the blood of the untold thousands who died there in the great battles between Vecna and Cass's forces. In the centuries since the Dark Powers had imprisoned Vecna and Cass, the war between them raged. Cass ruled his domain with an iron fist, raising armies from the oppressed people trapped within the realm he was given. Repeatedly, the mad vampire marched his armies through the burning peaks to lay siege to the Citadel Covidius. Vecna in turn raised and conjured endless undead to defend his throne and to swarm over the burning peaks and destroy his longtime enemy. But they were both doomed to failure. The war on the burning peaks was a form of eternal, mutually assured destruction, a perfect prison for both Vecna and Cass. The dark powers of Ravenloft ensured that neither could gain a final victory. If Vecna came too close to destroying Cass, the dark powers would subtly intervene, allowing Cass to survive and continue his war. Similarly, Cass could never truly break into Vecna's inner sanctum or destroy him for good, as his success would end the very torment that the dark powers had designed for them. The entire conflict was a living theater of their torment, an everlasting war with no winner, designed to make both Vecna and Cass suffer for their past evil deeds. On his throne, Vecna the Whispered One, the once human king and lich from Earth, who ascended to the heights of godhood, seethed with fury. He raged against the powers that held him in place, vowing that he would not only find a way to escape, but that he would also destroy the forces that currently imprison him. And so he set to work forming a plan, and in his rage he found serenity, for he knew exactly who and what he was. He was chosen of the Serpent, the personification of magic itself. The Serpent spoke directly to Vecna. Others dared to call themselves wizards, magicians, and sorcerers, manipulating the tiniest aspects of the Serpent and calling it magic. But Vecna spoke to the Serpent, and the Serpent spoke back. Vecna smiled to himself, his gaunt, decrepit skin stretching horrifically by the motion. Despite his entrapment in the demiplane of dread, long-laid plans had finally come to fruition. In his quest to achieve full and permanent godhood, he instigated several alternative strategies in the millennia of his existence. Many of these designs had played out with little to recommend them, but elements of more sinister schemes continued to move unnoticed. One such plan had materialized into something more promising. The Whispered One had set his cult to work again, and through his guidance and remaining divine power, had fabricated 2 tablets inscribed in the language primeval, and placed upon them a true Dwemer. True Dwemers represent 10th and higher level magic, and they can be understood and cast only by spellcasters of the absolute highest level. The language primeval, a surpassingly powerful magical grammar, was spoken by the ancient brethren, the elders, and other semi-mythical races when all the worlds were young or yet unborn. As a confidant of the serpent, Vecna had mastery over this purely magical tongue, and so he recorded a spell of uncommon power, then had them buried in a plausible archaeological site. The tablets were a setup, secretly aimed at a handful of demi-powers who meet Vecna's criteria. The very power of the magical language recorded upon them made the tablets and all consequences of their discovery impervious to almost every form of scrying and divinatory magic. Even when gods wielded such magic, the tablets remained steeped in mystery, save for a tantalizing clue hinting at a transcendental significance. Though any of a handful of demi-powers would have served Vecna's purpose, it was Vecna's most recent enemy who he aimed to manipulate into being tempted by his trap, the Corpse King Ayuz, and he was getting close. Having stolen the tablets from their original discoverer several years ago, Ayuz had slowly brought his considerable resources to bear on the tablets. The more Ayuz learned, the more the ancient formula seemed, to him, and all his divinatory means, an ancient Dwemer of stupendous strength, whereby a demi-power might raise itself to full ascension. The particulars of the Dwemer, according to Ayuz's study, required a portion of flesh from the original body of any other demi-power, called the sacrificial demi-power. While in possession of the relic, the candidate demi-power must cast the spell recorded on the tablet within a span of a few feet from the sacrificial demi-power. Energized by the Dwemer and using the relic as a conduit, the full power of the sacrificial demi-power flows to the candidate, and in so doing, elevates the candidate to full godhood, or so the tablets promised. But of course, the tablets were a lie. The actual magic resembled the formula in Ayuz's possession as recorded on the tablets. However, the real formula required the sacrificial demi-power to willingly instigate the magic of transfer as a catalyst. Then, when the tablet Dwemer concludes, the real candidate demi-power speaks the capstone phrase in the language primeval, which initiates the transfer through the relic conduit. As it stood, only Vecna knew the phrase. The time had come to lure his foe to his demise. Citadel Covidius had fallen. Ayuz's forces had blitzed the city after appearing suddenly from portals conjured from the mortal plane. The very same site Vecna and Ayuz had last battled, the Tovag Baragu. Vecna's forces were caught unaware and the siege broke through the skull-shaped walls of the city. Vecna's undead army fell like wheat before a farmer's scythe. Ayuz and his army poured into the citadel and made their way up its winding stairs to Vecna's palace. The Archlich's palace was no mere structure of conventional architecture. It stood as a physical manifestation of Vecna's power, arrogance, and the suffering of his trapped subjects. The palace loomed above the city, a massive, towering structure of necromantic design. It was not built from blocks of stone, but was a single grotesque form, with walls that writhed and seemed to breathe. A closer inspection of the material revealed a bizarre nature, a fusion of bone, metal, and necromantic energy. At the very top of the fortress rose a single, impossibly tall spire that reached into the gray sky of Covidius, a symbol of Vecna's unyielding pride. But Vecna's palace was more than just a fortress. It was the demigod's prison and his power source. The dark powers had trapped him here, but in his genius, Vecna found a way to use the domain's magical properties to his advantage. The torment of his trapped subjects strengthened him, and the castle itself was an ever-going, grand, magical ritual that amplified his power. And at its heart was Vecna's throne room. The throne itself, fashioned after the spider throne he sat upon in his days as an Archlich Emperor, was an extension of the castle's bone and metal. It was there that Vecna conducted his darkest rituals and received his most powerful minions. It was here he awaited Ayus, the air thick with negative energy. Ayus stormed into the throne room, a battalion of ogres at his back. Scintillating colors seemed to engulf the chamber, spinning in wild kaleidoscope patterns, appearing at once like beams of light and sheets of material carrying on an invisible maelstrom. Vecna's magic assailed Ayus. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the Corpse King, blade in hand, slashed at the colors spinning around him. His left eye glowed with an intense red light that seemed to cut through the waves of color as easily as his sword. Seated upon the spider throne, the robe-clad decaying skeleton form of Vecna traced glowing symbols and patterns in the air, making arcane gestures. Not to be repelled, Ayus raised his sword above his head, bringing it down in a dreadful arc, only to see its blade shatter against Vecna's chest. The Old One stood transfixed, unable to muster even a surprised gasp as he stared at the bladeless hilt in his hand. Vecna, however, rose to his feet. "You were always feeble-minded and weak, Ayus. You inherited your father's brains and scope of vision, and it shows. But now you will pay the price for your arrogance and stupidity." Vecna placed his right hand before Ayus, and he burst into flames. The screams of the demigod known as Old Wicked filled the air, and the flames seemed to be drawn into Vecna's body, disappearing into his empty eye socket. Ayus's body dissolved into smoking ash and a final few wisps of flame that spun upward through the air. The ashen flame merged to form a ghostly hand on Vecna's left wrist stump. Nothing remained of Ayus but a small, black gem where he had stood. Within moments, the decaying, rotting form of Vecna transformed into a tall, dark-haired man with handsome features. His eyes glowed with an unholy red fire, and a cold, humorless grin stretched across his face. "You have lost. You have all lost. The godlings who played at rulership here will trouble me no more, and this little reality is but one of many that will be destroyed in but moments. It has always been my destiny to be the master of all that is, was, or will be. With the aid of the serpent, I will undo what has been and is now, and I shall master all that will be." With the absorption of Ayus's divine power merged with his own, Vecna had risen to the status of a true divinity, a being too powerful for the dark powers to continue to hold. With a burst of power that ruptured existence itself, Vecna broke the metaphysical bonds that held him, and in doing so, he shattered domain boundaries everywhere in the demiplane of dread. And the great evil beings that were imprisoned by the dark powers in the mists returned to the worlds from whence they came. But this was not enough to satisfy the undead god. In his time imprisoned, his anger had festered, and in his festering, the seething vengeance Vecna yearned to unleash at the dark powers extended out to the very cosmos itself. He would never allow himself to fall victim to a power structure or cosmic being greater than himself, ever again. If the rules of reality as they existed could be used against him in such a way as this, then he would rewrite those rules. The cosmos would be his to shape and rule, and he would no longer suffer the possibility of enigmatic beings from beyond space and time to hinder him. He would bring it all down. But how? He was chosen of the serpent, and to him only did the serpent speak. And between the whispers of that ancient being and his own millennia-long gathering of knowledge, Vecna had surmised something the sages of the world never had. The outer planes, the spiritual realms of gods and fiends that served as the underlying structure, organization, and composition of all that existed, had a crux. That is where he would strike. Sigil, the City of Doors, a floating city in the center of the Outlands, and the self-proclaimed center of the multiverse in the Great Wheel cosmology. Sigil rises from the interior of a celestial ring that spins in place over the infinite outer planes. Buildings barnacled with ostentatious metallic blades and stone spikes line a wide cobblestone boulevard. Sculpted faces and gargoyle-like figures perch over every door, pillar, and rainspout. Fanciful iron grillwork covers many windows, and evil-looking vines sporting serrated leaves grow wild in the shadowed side streets. Built within a great ring, the city curves before and behind observers, as if they stood in a bowl or valley, stretching upward and disappearing into an industrial haze. On a clear day, a creature that looks upward sees the other side of the city, curving far overhead. Visitors can find this reality unsettling. There are no suns, moons, stars, or other celestial bodies in the skies above Sigil, though city lights twinkle above in the darkest hours. The city's location and geometry is considered by most sages, in particular the inhabitants of the material plane, to be impossible. It is impossible to walk into and out of Sigil from the Outer Lands, or any other location. It is also impossible to enter or exit the city, or even observe it, via spell, magic item, or any creature's innate abilities. The only pathways to and from the city are the countless established portals and links to other planes found throughout the city. The greatest entity in Sigil is the Lady of Pain, an eternal being who watches over the city. An entity of mystery on par with that of the serpent itself, and said to be one of the ancient brethren, a group of enigmatic beings that predates even the gods. She appears almost human, although she most definitely isn't. She wears ornate robes that shroud her body, and a mantle of blades coated in blue-green verdigris surround her mask-like face. No one is certain who or what exactly the Lady of Pain is, but it's widely accepted she's a being on par with deities. Strong enough to bar gods and their ilk from entering her city, the Lady of Pain forbids followers of her own. To worship her is more than taboo. It is an unforgivable crime punished by imprisonment in the Lady's infinite mazes. The Lady maintains the cosmic neutrality of Sigil. The city doesn't take part in the blood war. It doesn't throw its weight behind the shining righteousness of Mount Celestia, or contracts originating in the Nine Hells. And it is never a battleground for the conflicts of material plane worlds. On rare occasions, the Lady of Pain drifts through the streets of Sigil, hovering above the ground. Creatures that interfere with her are flayed by her stare or vanish into nothingness as she turns to face them. Wise travelers give the Lady a wide berth as she goes about her unknowable business. It was on a day such as this, a great black vortex tore open above the city. The Lady of Pain's unmoving features tilted upward to see the arrival of a great black fortress hovering in the sky. Using the misty fabric of Ravenloft itself, Vecna had bridged the gap between the prison plane of Cavidius and the City of Doors. Bypassing wards set by a power equal to the serpent, Vecna the Divine had arrived in Sigil, despite the ban against gods, which had stood for time immemorial, and reality began to unravel. The gods are warded from Sigil for a very important reason. The celestial ring beneath the city is the physical manifestation of the multiverse's fulcrum. The torus's nature is such that it cannot abide coexistence with point source divine energy. A god in Sigil disrupts the fulcrum, and thus the entire multiverse. Given enough time, it is conceivable that all planes could be thrown into rack and ruin. And such was Vecna's scheme. As the perpetrator of planar ruin, Vecna proposed to set himself up as the supreme deity of the new multiversal order that would unfold from this one's destruction. But how had he done it? How had he bypassed the wards that should have barred his passing? Perhaps the serpent had whispered to Vecna the word of power needed to counter its brethren, the Lady of Pain's own power. Or maybe the transitional status between demigod and true deity Vecna had momentarily held while he transferred himself and his citadel to Sigil allowed him to pass. Or, more likely, it was a combination of the two. For god or no one should have had the capability to rip open a portal of any kind into the city, let alone one large enough to let pass a god and a portion of his domain. Vecna cackled upon his throne. With his divine sight, he could see the swath of destruction his presence was causing as the integrity of the cosmos was beginning to break apart. Frigid hail beat down upon the city streets and stone buildings. Tremors ripped through the city. Cobblestones buckle, walls crack, and roofs fall, sending up plumes of dust into the air and starting fires. Searing winds tore across the city, raising portions of it to unbearable temperatures. Riots were outbreaking among the surviving populace. Extraplanar monsters were slipping in from other planes of existence, causing more mayhem in their confusion. And the cult of Vecna, who had hidden in wait for this moment, rose up to add more kindling to the fire in their now true god's name. The city was in utter chaos. But all was not so easy. The maimed god was somewhat compromised in this place. Though he approached true godhood, his ability to channel power remained limited by his position in Sigil. He could not consciously summon minions or any other creatures he desired into the city, due to the wards set against planar travel still holding. Moreover, he had to exert a large portion of his power to remain in Sigil, due to the constant pressure the Lady of Pain was applying to him to cast him out. This pressure, a hideous supernatural agony, was being constantly neutralized by Vecna's counterflow of power. Finally, due to the immense amount of power and concentration it took to keep the Lady of Pain at bay, Vecna could only manifest a single avatar, which was the focus of his power on Sigil. Were he not a god, he might have been vulnerable. But a god he was, and thus he feared no strike, save by that of a fellow deity or deific level power. And with the Lady of Pain locked into a stalemate of wills, it was only a matter of time until his success came to fruition. It was then that Vecna sensed it, a blip on the fringe of his senses. No, it could not be. He focused on the portion of the city below where he felt the presence. There it was again, undeniable this time. Down in the city below, someone or something carried 3 powerful relics. Relics intrinsically tied to Vecna, his past, and his power. Somewhere below traveled the hand and eye of Vecna, as well as the sword of Cass, each a part of his essence, each with the ability to harm him. The Whispered One screamed in rage. Adventurers. It had to be. There was no other explanation. Over the course of untold millennia, the great and mighty, be they archmage, demigod, or demon lord, countless had fallen to the unwitting power of this miscreant rabble. Like cockroaches, they crawled out of every crevice and dark corner. And even here and now, in the furthest flung region of the cosmos from the material plane, among the very heavens, as his power crescendoed to hitherto unseen heights, a band of no-named vagabonds arrogant enough to believe they could defy him appear, as if from thin air, with the only things in the multiverse capable of deposing him. Vecna laughed at the great comedy of reality. Then he steeled himself. The scaffolding of the cosmos was already straining under the weight of Sigil's breaking. Reality would be undone and remade in his image. It was already too late. The cosmos would break, regardless of anything else on this day. Vecna screamed in vile hatred as he watched his minions fall one by one. Sladi, undead, necromancers, and more. Every trap and red herring detected. Every puzzle and roadblock overcome. His scream transcended sound itself, vibrating the structure of his palace to its core. And as the adventurers entered his throne room, wielding the relics of his blood, bone, and consciousness, Vecna revealed his true form, a titanic humanoid lined in brilliance. Its left eye absent and its left hand entirely missing. But despite this maimed form, it was clear that Vecna had finally achieved godhood. The god spoke. "Get their relics! Tear my holy relics from their profane bodies!" Vecna's chief minions charged the adventurers, but could not stand against his relics any more than they could have stood against him. Vecna snarled as they fell and let loose devastating spell after devastating spell, but the hand and eye deemed their wielders impervious to his magic. Together they struck at Vecna, and where they landed blows, Vecna found that he could not heal himself. With a mixed look of astonishment and pure rage upon his face, Vecna spoke. "You will pay, you puny—" Vecna failed to finish his words as the sword of Cass was plunged directly through his chest. And it did more than pierce his body. The unparalleled betrayal the sword of Cass had come to represent over the millennia since its creation, as well as the never-ending thirst for vengeance it craved against its former master, struck a blow to Vecna's very soul. The shock was enough for his concentration to finally slip. The Lady of Pain made her move. A swirling void of deep black and darkest gray opened up behind the Whispered One, and all at once, Vecna, the maimed god, was pulled through the vortex, leaving behind only a roar of fury and a flare of light. The portal then disappeared in a burst of blinding light. With Vecna's defeat, the reverberations of a dissolving multiverse ceased. The Lady of Pain reopened Sigil's portals. Unfortunately, Vecna had successfully tested Sigil's wards, showing a way for other power-mad deities to find entry. Thus, the Lady of Pain, a confidant or perhaps even peer to the serpent, spoke in the language primeval. Uttering her words while standing in the crux of the multiverse known as Sigil, she reordered reality. Uttering her words, the only words spoken by her in the last several millennia, she shored up Sigil's wards against entry by deities who attempted to infiltrate as Vecna did. Uttering her words, she attempted to shore up the sum of all creation, the very multiverse. But even with Vecna's removal, his time in the crux affected irreversible damage. Though the Lady of Pain attempted to heal the damage, the turmoil spawned by Vecna's time in Sigil could not entirely be erased. Some outer planes drifted off and were forever lost. Others collided and merged. Moreover, the very nature of the prime material plane itself was altered. Half-worlds, like those attached to Tovag Baragu, multiplied a millionfold, taking on a parallel realism in what was before unified prime material plane. New realms, both near and far, were revealed, and realms never previously imagined made themselves known. Entities long thought lost emerged once more, while other creatures, both great and small, were inexplicably eradicated. Some common spells began to operate differently. These changes did not occur immediately, but instead were revealed during the subsequent months and years. However, one thing remained clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. This has been D&D Legends and Lore. Thanks so much for listening or watching on your platform of choice. If you enjoyed this episode, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Also, consider leaving us a review, especially on Apple Podcasts. It really helps others find the show. If you'd like to support us more directly, check out our Patreon or channel memberships on YouTube. There you'll also find ad-free early episodes as well as live play and third-party D&D content. Links, as always, are in the description. With that, thank you for listening, and happy adventuring.